The NFL wasn't ready for this. It started as a whisper, one of those late-night rumors that usually fade by morning, but this one detonated like a bomb. Within minutes, phones were lighting up in league offices from New York to Los Angeles. Agents, coaches, executives, everyone scrambling for confirmation. Everyone asking the same impossible question. Did Shedeur Sanders really say no to the NFL? What began as an unverified leak on social media suddenly felt like the biggest power move in football history. Reports claimed Shedeur was considering walking away from the NFL pipeline entirely to join the European League of Football, not for an exhibition, not for an off-season stunt, but for real competition, for actual seasons, for control. At first, the reaction was pure disbelief. Executives dismissed it as nonsense, a rookie headline blown out of proportion. But then came the second wave, a new rumor suggesting Shedeur wasn't alone. Tyreek Hill and Lamar Jackson had reportedly joined the conversation. That's when the laughter stopped. That's when the panic began. Inside war rooms and practice facilities, the tone shifted from curiosity to chaos. Suddenly, this wasn't about a draft prospect or contract leverage. This was about something far more dangerous, a potential rebellion against the system itself. Because if there's one thing the NFL fears most, it's not competition from another league. It's losing control of its players. And if Shedeur Sanders, the face of a new generation, was really planning to walk away and take two superstars with him, the entire foundation of professional football could be about to crack wide open. This wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a message, a warning shot fired straight at the heart of the establishment. It all started in the dead of night, a random post buried deep in the chaos of social media. No source, no official report, just a single claim: Shedeur Sanders is leaving the NFL pipeline. Within minutes, that single spark became a wildfire. League offices, coaching staffs, and agent headquarters all started buzzing simultaneously. Texts flew, calls overlapped, and by 2 a.m. it wasn't just rumor control, it was a full-blown meltdown. What made this moment different wasn't the uncertainty, it was the timing. The league was gearing up for draft season, expecting Shedeur to be one of its crown jewels, the young quarterback who would headline the next generation. But instead of headlines about his draft interviews or combine prep, the conversation had flipped upside down. Insiders said some executives initially laughed it off. "Europe, come on," one anonymous GM reportedly said. "Nobody leaves the NFL for that." But the laughter didn't last long, because within hours a second rumor hit, one that sent shockwaves through every front office in the league. It wasn't just Shedeur. Tyreek Hill and Lamar Jackson were allegedly discussing joining him. That changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't a stunt or a negotiation tactic. This was a potential exodus. By sunrise, emergency meetings were underway. Phone lines jammed. Analysts tried to track down sources only to find the story spreading faster than they could verify. Nobody could confirm it, but nobody could deny it either. And that's what terrified the league the most. Because whether or not it was true, the idea alone was powerful enough to make people believe it could be. In just a few hours, the NFL's perfect off-season narrative, draft hype, rookie spotlights, and training camp optimism had been hijacked by a single question echoing across the internet. What if Shedeur Sanders doesn't need the NFL at all? Behind the chaos and speculation, there was one undeniable truth. Shedeur Sanders had been thinking differently for a long time. This wasn't some impulsive, ego-driven stunt. It was part of something bigger, something strategic. According to people close to his circle, Shedeur had been asking a simple but dangerous question for months. What if we stop waiting our turn? For years, young athletes had been told to follow the system, play college ball, enter the draft, take the rookie contract, earn your place, and maybe someday get a say in how things work. But Shedeur didn't see that as a path. He saw it as a trap. What fascinated him wasn't just fame or stats, it was control. Control over his image, control over his brand, control over the business that surrounded his name. And Europe, of all places, was suddenly becoming the perfect testing ground. Across Germany, France, and Spain, the European League of Football was quietly exploding. New stadiums, bigger sponsorships, and most importantly, audiences that were starting to crave American football the way the rest of the world craves soccer. While NFL executives saw Europe as a novelty market, Shedeur saw it as a blank canvas. He understood something the NFL didn't, that the power no longer sits in boardrooms or commissioner offices. It lives in influence, in reach, and who can move culture. And Shedeur, with his charisma, media savvy, and family legacy, was built for that new model. The European League wasn't offering him a paycheck, they were offering him freedom. Complete creative control over his public image, the ability to launch personal merchandise lines, negotiate media rights, and even have input on how his team was built. It wasn't about leaving the NFL, it was about building something no one had ever built before, a global platform where the athlete isn't just a player, but the architect. For Shedeur Sanders, this wasn't rebellion, it was evolution. And if the rumors were true, he was ready to show the world what that evolution looked like. Starting in Europe, the first real sign that this was more than just talk came from a single leaked message, one that reportedly came straight from a European club executive. It wasn't vague, it wasn't cryptic. It said, in plain terms, he wants to bring 2 more stars. He wants to build a movement. Scribbled beside that message were 2 names, Tyreek and Lamar. That was the moment everything changed.
Within hours, screenshots of private group chats started circulating. Journalists whispered about off-record confirmations. Fans began connecting dots that, until then, no one had dared to align. Tyreek Hill, one of the fastest men on the planet, had followed Shedeur on every major platform that same day the rumor broke. Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP, had gone unusually silent online. No denial, no comment, no deflection. For internet detectives, silence was the loudest statement of all. Suddenly, the idea of Shedeur walking away wasn't just shocking, it was inspiring. Social media erupted with hashtags like #TheNewLeague and #PlayerPower as fan-made posters depicted Shedeur, Tyreek, and Lamar standing together in European jerseys like some sort of football Avengers. And the wildest part? People weren't laughing. They were excited. The fantasy of watching America's most electric athletes play on a new global stage didn't feel ridiculous anymore. It felt revolutionary. Behind closed doors, the energy was different. Executives started calling this situation the movement, and they weren't wrong. Because whether or not the 3 stars had actually made a pact, their influence was already spreading. Other young players began speaking openly about control, about wanting more say in their contracts, branding, and creative direction. For years, the NFL had been the dream. Now, it was starting to look like a cage. And for Shedeur Sanders, the message was simple. If the system won't evolve, then maybe it's time to create one that will. But as whispers turned into headlines and fans started choosing sides, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Europe anymore. This was about power. And for the first time in decades, the NFL didn't seem to have it. By the next morning, what started as a rumor had evolved into a full-scale crisis. Inside the NFL's headquarters, executives weren't just monitoring social media, they were scrambling. Calls between general managers and owners were non-stop. Every team with a potential draft pick connected to Shedeur wanted answers. Cleveland, in particular, was in chaos. They'd built their entire offseason plan around the assumption that Shedeur Sanders was their quarterback of the future, the new face of their franchise. But now, they were facing the very real possibility that their future star might never step onto an NFL field at all. Coaches tried to downplay it, calling it social media noise. But even inside locker rooms, the mood had shifted. One Browns staffer reportedly said, "If Shedeur leaves, half our locker room follows him anywhere." That wasn't an exaggeration. It was a warning. Players had started to see what Shedeur represented. Freedom from the system that controlled every contract, every endorsement, every ounce of individuality. And that realization terrified the league. Because if one player, a rookie no less, could inspire that kind of loyalty, what would happen if veterans started thinking the same way? Within days, the commissioner's office called an emergency meeting. They discussed options, damage control, public statements, even legal action, but no one had a real solution. How do you fight something that isn't even official yet? How do you contain an idea? Behind closed doors, executives debated whether to make Shedeur a special offer, something unprecedented to keep him tied to the NFL. But others warned that doing so would set a dangerous precedent. If we bend for him, every rookie from now on will demand the same thing. It wasn't just panic, it was fear. Because for the first time, the NFL wasn't the one setting the terms, it was reacting. And the more the league tried to dismiss the rumors, the louder they became. What had started as a whisper from an unverified account had now turned into a global conversation about ownership, control, and the future of the game itself. The NFL was used to competition on the field, not off it. But this time, they weren't fighting another team. They were fighting a movement. And deep down, everyone knew they were already losing. The deeper the rumors spread, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a football story anymore. It was cultural. The reaction split the sports world right down the middle. On one side were the traditionalists, older fans, retired players, and analysts who saw Shedeur's rumored move as a direct challenge to everything the NFL stood for. To them, it was disrespectful, even dangerous. They called it arrogance, a shortcut, a publicity stunt. But on the other side, an entirely new generation of fans was rising up, younger, louder, and unapologetically supportive. To them, Shedeur wasn't breaking the rules, he was rewriting them. Social media became the battleground. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag player freedom, next era, built not bought. Edits showing Shedeur, Tyreek, and Lamar walking through European stadiums went viral overnight, gathering millions of views. Fan-made jerseys sold out on unofficial sites within hours. Someone even posted an animation of Shedeur walking through a crumbling NFL logo, and it was everywhere. This wasn't marketing, it was momentum.
The younger audience didn't care about tradition. They cared about autonomy. They grew up watching creators, influencers, and athletes build their own brands without waiting for approval. And now, they were seeing the same energy enter the one place that had always been untouchable, the NFL. Shedeur had become more than a player. He was a symbol of independence. Every cryptic post, every silent move was analyzed like a chess piece. He wasn't saying much, but he didn't have to. His silence was the message. Meanwhile, sports talk shows were melting down. Some hosts called it the death of discipline, others called it the birth of freedom. The divide wasn't just about football. It was about control, loyalty, and what the next era of sports would look like. Even players who hadn't spoken publicly were watching closely. They saw how quickly the conversation shifted, how one rumor could expose just how fragile the league's dominance really was. Because this was no longer about where Shedeur would play, it was about what he represented. A generation of athletes who no longer wanted to be managed, they wanted to create. And for the first time in NFL history, the power wasn't in the league's hands. It was in the hands of the players, and the fans cheering them on. Then came the twist no one saw coming: Europe. What started as a wild rumor turned into a calculated threat that had every NFL executive on edge. Reports began surfacing that Shedeur had quietly been in contact with major European investors and sports tech companies, exploring the idea of a player-led league, one that would be streamed globally, funded by billionaires, and completely outside the NFL's control. At first, it sounded ridiculous. American football outside the US? It had been tried before, and every attempt failed. But this time, something was different. The world had changed. Streaming was global, fandoms were digital, and influence wasn't tied to geography anymore. If Shedeur could bring names like Tyreek Hill, Micah Parsons, and Lamar Jackson into the conversation, the whole thing might not just work, it could redefine professional football entirely. Whispers began to spread about meetings in London and Monaco, private flights, and calls with international marketing agencies. Rumor had it Shedeur's team was pitching a concept called the Eurogrid, a hybrid league where athletes owned equity, not just contracts. No salary caps, no commissioner control, just pure performance, star power, and media reach. Whether the details were true or not didn't matter. The idea alone was powerful enough to shake the foundation of the NFL. ESPN insiders claimed the league office held emergency strategy meetings. Legal teams started reviewing player contracts for loopholes. The words non-compete and image rights suddenly became the most discussed terms in sports law. The NFL had faced threats before, from rival leagues, from labor disputes, but this was different. This was the internet generation's rebellion, and it was spreading faster than any PR team could contain. Meanwhile, in Europe, clubs and media outlets smelled opportunity. Paris, Madrid, and Berlin-based investors began hinting at crossovers, joint events, global sponsorships, even influencer partnerships to build hype. European soccer stars posted cryptic emojis, a football, a flame, a crown, in response to Shedeur's posts. It was subtle, but it sent a message. If the NFL wouldn't let him lead, Europe just might. The equation was suddenly clear. Shedeur didn't need to fight the NFL from within, he could build something new outside of it. The math was simple. Global streaming audience? Billions. Player equity? Limitless. Media freedom? Total. And even if one major star followed his lead, the ripple effect could be unstoppable. But this wasn't just about business or contracts anymore. It was about vision. And the league's biggest fear was that Shedeur's next move wouldn't be a press conference in New York, but a flight to London. By now, the rumor had become more than speculation. It was leverage. Shedeur Sanders, still technically under contract, was suddenly operating like a free agent in a world where contracts meant nothing if your influence outweighed your paycheck. The NFL wasn't just nervous, it was reactive. Behind closed doors, executives were scrambling to figure out how much power a single player could really have when his brand reached beyond the league itself. Because this wasn't about money anymore, it was about control. Shedeur had figured out something the NFL had spent decades trying to hide, that influence, not contracts, was the real currency. He didn't need to hold a press conference or demand a trade, all he had to do was pause. Stop posting team photos, skip a media appearance, drop a single cryptic emoji on Instagram, and the entire sports world erupted. Every silence became a headline, every rumor a negotiation. Insiders began reporting that the league had reached out privately, offering new marketing deals, revised endorsement terms, even a media partnership to keep him in-house. But Shedeur didn't budge, because for the first time, he was the one setting the terms, and everyone else, from sponsors to networks, had to adjust. And meanwhile, his following only grew. Major influencers began aligning themselves with his message. Player power wasn't a slogan anymore, it was a movement. Young athletes started posting about owning their brand, refusing to be controlled by the shield. College players began tagging Shedeur in highlight reels, calling him the blueprint. What had started as a rumor was now a full-blown cultural negotiation between players and the establishment. And the wildest part, the NFL couldn't punish him. Every potential move, suspension, fine, or public statement risked making him a martyr for athlete independence. So, instead, they stayed quiet, hoping the story would fade. But it didn't, because silence was exactly what kept the suspense alive.
Shedeur was playing a game of chess, and the league was realizing too late that it had been playing checkers. Every headline about disrespect or ego only amplified his power. He wasn't reacting, he was orchestrating. The NFL was still the biggest show in sports, but for the first time, it wasn't the only one writing the script. And as the weeks passed, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about whether Shedeur would stay or go. It was about how long the NFL could pretend it still had the upper hand. By the time the chaos settled, one thing was undeniable. Football had changed forever. Whether Shedeur Sanders ever made that rumored leap to Europe didn't even matter anymore. The power shift had already happened. The NFL, once untouchable, had been forced to look in the mirror and confront something it never saw coming, a generation of athletes who didn't need the league to be legends. What Shedeur did, intentionally or not, was redefine what it means to have leverage in sports. He proved that influence travels faster than contracts, that fans follow personalities more than franchises, and that silence can sometimes speak louder than any press conference. The game had always been about touchdowns, trophies, and stats, but now it was about ownership, autonomy, and narrative control. The league will adapt, it always does, but that old system, built on control and compliance, just got exposed for how fragile it really is. Players saw what one person could do with the right audience and timing. Sponsors saw the value of personality over policy. And fans They saw a new era forming right in front of their eyes, where athletes aren't just part of the game, but own it. In the end, Shedeur's rumored rebellion wasn't a meltdown. It was a mirror, a reflection of a new kind of power rising from the next generation of athletes who understand branding, business, and influence better than the executives who once dictated their futures. The message was simple. If you can build your own audience, you can build your own empire. So whether Shedeur stays, leaves, or creates something entirely new, it won't change what's already been set in motion. Because this wasn't the end of an era. It was the beginning of football's next one. A world where control doesn't belong to the league, but to the players bold enough to take it.